The thunder of siege engines tore through the quiet of early morning as hungry families gathered in the darkened streets of Samaria. A kingdom once powerful, born from rebellion and sustained by promises of divine favor, now stood on the brink of destruction, not because of one sudden devastating battle, but because of the slow corrosion caused by its own internal divisions. This is not legend. It is the historical account of how the northern kingdom of Israel fell in 722 BC, undermined from within and ultimately crushed by the relentless Assyrian war machine. What follows is a dramatic saga of kings, prophets, betrayal, and exile. A story that challenges us to ask whether similar fractures still threaten nations today. In the sun-scorched hills of ancient Canaan, among olive groves that swayed beneath desert winds, the kingdom of Israel once flourished as a symbol of strength and prosperity. Emerging around 930 BC after the united monarchy under King Solomon fractured, the northern kingdom, made up of 10 of the 12 Israelite tribes, broke away in defiance. Led by Jeroboam I, who feared losing his people's loyalty to the temple in Jerusalem under Judah's control. Israel established new centers of power, first at Shechem and later at Samaria. The split was more than political, it was spiritual. Jeroboam set up golden calves at Bethel and Dan, declaring to his people that these were the gods who had delivered them from Egypt, as described in the biblical book of Kings. What began as a political strategy to consolidate authority gradually opened the door to idolatry, blending the worship of Yahweh with Canaanite deities such as Baal, the storm god. Rituals that promised fertility instead deepened religious division. For a time, Israel prospered under rulers like Omri and his son Ab. During the 9th century BC, the kingdom expanded its borders, built alliances, and constructed grand palaces. Samaria, rising on a hilltop with imposing walls, became a center of wealth and influence. Ivory inlaid homes, vast storage facilities, and thriving trade networks linked it with Phoenicia and other distant regions. Ahab's marriage to Jezebel, a Phoenician princess, increased prosperity but intensified religious conflict. The prophet Elijah confronted this tension dramatically on Mount Carmel, where he challenged the prophets of Baal in a divine contest. Fire descending from heaven consumed Elijah's offering, exposing the emptiness of rival gods. Yet the people remained divided, wavering between tradition and foreign influence. Beneath the surface of success, cracks widened. After the death of Jeroboam II around 753 BC, a ruler whose military victories had restored Israel's borders to their former strength, the kingdom descended into instability. Though Jeroboam II had expanded territory, improved agriculture, and enriched royal treasuries, the prophet Amos revealed the moral decay hidden beneath prosperity. He condemned the exploitation of the poor and the corruption of courts, warning that injustice would bring divine judgment. His warnings were largely ignored. Political chaos accelerated the decline. Rival tribes competed for dominance, and resentment grew against centralized authority in Samaria. A series of assassinations destabilized leadership. Zechariah ruled only briefly before being murdered. His successor Shalom lasted just a month before being overthrown. Menahem seized power violently and ruled through fear, imposing heavy taxes to pay tribute to Assyria. Subsequent rulers continued the cycle of conspiracy and bloodshed. These repeated coups shattered military unity, dividing armies into factions loyal to competing claimants. Religious fragmentation compounded the problem. The prophet Hosea described Israel as an unfaithful spouse, accusing the nation of abandoning its covenant. He foretold destruction from the north, identifying Assyria as the instrument of judgment for idolatry and injustice. Meanwhile, the new Assyrian Empire was rising. Under Tiglath-Pileser II, 745 to 727 BC, Assyria transformed into a disciplined and technologically advanced military power. Iron weapons, siege towers, and battering rams strengthened its campaigns. After conquering neighboring regions, Assyria turned westward. Israel, weakened internally, became vulnerable. In 743 BC, Menahem paid a heavy tribute of silver to Assyria to avoid invasion, burdening his people further. Later, King Pekah allied with Aram Damascus against Judah, hoping to resist Assyria. The strategy failed when Judah appealed to Assyria for help. Tiglath-Pileser intervened, destroyed Damascus, annexed Israel's northern territories, and deported thousands of inhabitants to distant lands. This first wave of deportation severely weakened Israel's manpower. Hoshea, Israel's final king, 732 to 722 BC, initially submitted to Assyria and paid tribute. But internal decay, economic strain, and unheeded prophetic warnings continued. Desperate, Hoshea sought support from Egypt and halted tribute payments around 725 BC. Egypt offered promises but no real military aid. Assyria discovered the rebellion. Hoshea was arrested and imprisoned. Shalmaneser V led Assyrian forces against Israel in 724 BC. Cities fell rapidly, and Samaria prepared for siege. Though fortified with double walls and water reserves, internal divisions weakened resistance. The siege lasted 3 grueling years. Assyrian records later credited Sargoniah, Shalmaneser's successor, with conquering Samaria and deporting 27,290 inhabitants. Assyrian tactics combined military force and psychological warfare. Famine gripped the city. Economic exhaustion and fractured loyalty crippled defense efforts. Eventually, Samaria fell in 722 BC. Israel's sovereignty ended, its downfall rooted in internal weakness that invited external conquest. Following victory, Assyria implemented mass deportations. Captives were resettled in distant territories. Over generations, the exiled tribes assimilated, giving rise to the tradition of the 10 lost tribes. In their place, Assyria settled foreign populations, mixing cultures and religions. The resulting community became known as the Samaritans, blending traditions and creating lasting tensions with Judah. The causes of Israel's fall were unmistakable: political instability, social injustice, spiritual division, and military fragmentation left the kingdom unable to withstand Assyria's power. Prophets had warned of consequences, but arrogance prevailed. The legacy of 722 BC echoes across history. It stands as a reminder that internal division can invite external domination. Like Rome centuries later, Israel's collapse illustrates how moral and political fractures weaken nations from within. Yet even in exile, identity endured. Fragments of tradition survived among displaced communities, influencing later Jewish history. The story closes not only with destruction, but with resilience, a reminder that while kingdoms may fall, memory and identity can persist.